Christmas 1979, Soviet armor pours across the Afghan border towards Kabul as helicopters secure the mountain passes through the Hindukush mountains in Moscow. The Politburo has decided to save Afghanistan's communist government from collapse. Afghan rebels have taken up arms against the unpopular regime and control most of the countryside. But the Red Army leadership doubts it can pacify the country, so why did the Soviet Union invade Afghanistan? Afghanistan in the 1970s is a country with a long history as a crossroads of empire and internal instability. After World War II, there's a period of relative stability under King Zahir Shah, whose government introduces moderate reforms to avoid angering conservatives. He also suppresses those demanding too much change, including Afghan communists who already have contact with the Soviet KGB. In 1964, King Zahir introduces a more liberal constitution that allows political parties. At the same time, Kabul universities become a hotbed of political activity, from moderates to monarchists to Islamists to communists. Campus communists create the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan. Among their founding members are Hafizul Amin, Babrak Karmal, and Nur Muhammad Taraki, all of whom work with the KGB. They have strong admiration for the Soviet transformation of its Central Asian republics. They want radical change, but project a more moderate line in public, and still only attract support from a few urban elites and Soviet-trained army officers. The few communists there were also split along ethnic and ideological lines in 1967, with a more hardline group under Taraki and a more moderate group under Karmal. While some Afghans look to socialism, others look to political Islam, not necessarily radical Islam. Neither educated Islamist Afghans debate what a modern Islamic society should be like. The king even encourages Islamist activities to contain Marxist influence. The most important Islamist group is also founded at a university, Jamiat-e-Islami, which preaches a conservative form of Islam inspired by Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood. Afghanistan's relations with the wider world are also in flux after 1945. In 1960, Soviet-equipped Afghan forces clash with neighboring Pakistan over the status of cross-border territory inhabited by Afghanistan's biggest ethnic group, the Pashtuns. Pakistan wants a stable and neutral Afghanistan so it can focus on its conflict with India. Kabul also looks abroad for humanitarian aid from both sides of the Cold War. Officially non-aligned, Afghanistan leans heavily on Soviet aid, including for infrastructure, but engineers and other advisors from the US, West Germany, and elsewhere also work in the country. American scholar Louis Dupree writes of a privileged American-Soviet role in Afghanistan. In towns outside Kabul, where Russians had major projects, their technicians lived as well as, if not better than, the Americans. They had spacious hotel and apartment accommodations, lavish commissaries, private theaters, Olympic-sized swimming pools. Many Soviet technicians genuinely felt disturbed when ordered home after a tour of duty. Like their American counterparts, they had never had it so good. Dupree, 527. The modernization program and international aid help create a small urban middle class in Afghan cities. The countryside accepts new infrastructure but resists social changes that make some headway in cities, like women's education and rights. By the 1960s, Afghanistan's modernization is falling behind other developing states, and King Zahir is still reluctant to further democratize the country, partly due to his fear of communism. In 1973, Mohammed Daoud Khan takes power in an army-backed coup. At first he works with the moderate communists, but soon excludes them and rules as a strongman, silencing any opposition and purging the civil service and officer corps. Afghan Islamists oppose Daoud's progressive policies and harsh rule, and Pakistan's intelligence service, ISI, provides them training and equipment for armed resistance. After an ISI-supported Islamist attack against Afghan government buildings in 1975, Daoud imprisons, executes, or forces them into exile. Many Islamists flee to Pakistan, where President Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's government allows them to settle in the hopes of creating a thorn in Kabul's side. Former engineering student Mohammed Ashaq remembers the escape to Pakistan. "We took part in an operation in the Panjshir Valley in 1975, and we were defeated. Then we had to retreat into the mountains, and it was very dark. We had to stay at the top of the mountain. We did not have enough clothes because we were coming from a warm area, and I think I got sick. We could not get warm, but we could not move because of the enemy. The Islamists are split into several groups based on ideological disagreements. But they claim legitimacy among hundreds of thousands of Afghans who also flee into Pakistan. Daud reaches out to many states for development and military aid, and asks the US for intel on Soviet intentions even as he strikes an economic deal with Moscow and starts to improve relations with Pakistan and Iran. Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev wants to maintain decades of Soviet investment and influence in Afghanistan, and advises Daud during a Moscow meeting in April 1977, some NATO personnel in northern Afghanistan who are spies and are a security risk to the USSR should be removed. But Daud brushes him off. Afghanistan is a free and independent country, and we will not tolerate anyone telling us who to allow and who not to allow to work for us. In April 1978, demonstrations break out at the funeral of a prominent Afghan communist. In response, Daud arrests PDP leaders. Now though, the Afghan communists are better organized, have united the rival factions, and enjoy KGB support. They have infiltrated some state institutions, including the army. Daud's regime has lost support among the middle class, and communist army officers rally troops loyal to the PDPA. Tanks roll into Kabul while jet fighters scream overhead, and PDPA troops kill Daud and more than 1,000 of his followers in fierce fighting. A 15-year-old Afghan remembers the announcement of the Sur Revolution on April 27, 1978. We could hear Radio Afghanistan playing revolutionary songs and the repeated statement, "The revolution of 7th Sur has been victorious, and the armed forces of the country are in control. We congratulate the people of Afghanistan." The teachers told us to clap and then go into class. After only a few hours, we went home. My father asked why I'd come home early and I explained it all to him. "God bless us," he said. "The future is not good." Leak 43. The coup comes as a surprise to both the Soviets and the Americans, and each thinks the other is behind it. But the Afghan communists have seized power on their own, and under a revolutionary council led by Taraki and Amin they implement a radical program, land reform including forced expropriations and equal rights for women. They also suppress any opposition with mass executions, torture, and imprisonments. Publicly, Taraki proclaims that the new Democratic Republic of Afghanistan will remain part of the non-aligned movement. Our relationship with all the countries, including the Soviet Union, and all our neighbors, and throughout the world, will be based and will depend on the amount of their support to our revolutionary government. But Pakistan is skeptical about the coup, as it fears another hostile neighbor along with India and the USSR. The shows Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the US are concerned as well, and all three countries support Pakistan-based training of various Afghan Islamist groups loosely referred to as Mujahideen, or those fighting for God. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, cautiously welcomes a communist Afghanistan, and the two states soon agree to more Soviet advisors and $250 million in military aid. But Taraki and Amin want more, and the Soviets are concerned about the PDP's actions. The party strains under infighting as the radical faction purges the ranks and exiles moderates like Karmal. It also struggles with a deeply religious population and traditional social structure. PDP thinkers believe clergy and tribal leaders are feudalists, holding back progress. But the Soviets advise them to carefully divide and conquer their class enemies. Taraki, though, maintains a hard line. These agents of colonialism who hatch conspiracy under the mask of religion and faith have been plotting for many years against progressive movements in different countries. They should be uprooted like a cancer tumor from the body of a patient. The PDP launches an all-out offensive, arresting or killing mullahs and their families. The population turns even more against the communists, and the Islamists position themselves as saviors of Islam and the Afghan people. Local uprisings lead to Mujahideen control in much of the north and east. The PDPA responds with more violence, carried out by the secret police, the KGB-supported intel agency, and Surindoy paramilitaries. All the while, the internal split between Taraki and his ambitious protege Amin deepens. The PDPA script further weakens in 1979 and February. Unknown militants kidnap U.S. Ambassador Adolf Dubs and hold him in central Kabul. Then Afghan government forces, with KGB involvement, botch an attempted rescue. Dubs is killed, and the U.S. stops aid programs. In March, a week-long uprising begins in Herat. An entire army division mutinies after being ordered to quell protests. Kabul sends in more troops. The protesters then kill those suspected of connections to the PDPA and lynch Soviet civilian advisors and their families. The government puts down the uprising at a cost of between 3,000 and 25,000 dead. Another revolt in Kunar province ends with 640 deaths in Kerala village. Witnessed by 16-year-old Mohammed Ashak, my father told me to get up and run, and I ran to the mosque. Behind me I heard the sound of gunfire. From the mosque, I saw soldiers take more men to another field and shoot them. A worried Taraki asks Moscow to intervene to shore up the Afghan government. Almost nobody does support the government. In Kabul we have no workers, only craftsmen. If Herat falls, then the revolution is doomed. Uprisings have emerged throughout the entire country, and the army is too small to be able to pacify the insurgents everywhere. The Politburo, though, is shocked at Kabul's brutal reaction to the Herat uprising. We gave them everything and what had come off. Nothing of any value. After all, it was they who executed innocent people for no reason and told us that we also executed people in Lenin's time. You see what kind of Marxists we found. Moscow begins to consider military intervention to keep Afghanistan within its sphere of influence, but not all agree. Head of the KGB Yuri Andropov is among the skeptics. He worries that Afghanistan is too underdeveloped to solve its problems with socialism, and only through force could the USSR prevent a revolution. A risk he advises against. After the Herat uprising, Amin becomes prime minister. And although he and Taraki are still at odds, both request more Soviet aid. Moscow somewhat reluctantly agrees to send equipment, including T-62 tanks and Mi-24 helicopters, and more military advisors, but they refuse to send troops. Even so, the Mujahideen have already noticed the limited Soviet presence. The Russians have taken part in the Afghan war now, and they have been in Panjshir and Pakshe, and also in Konar areas. Some of the Russian advisors have been killed. The Soviets want Amin out since they hold him responsible for the massacres and policy failures, and are suspicious because he previously studied in the US. They inform Taraki in September 1979, after which he tries to capture and probably kill Amin. But Amin escapes and has Taraki murdered with a pillow and takes over. The insurgency gains momentum quickly. 40% of the Afghan army deserts, leaving it with just 60,000 men, and about 40,000 Afghan men join the Mujahideen. The insurgents control 4 provinces and the countryside and a dozen others. Amin reaches out to the US and UK and says he wants to deepen ties, though both countries are suspicious of his motives. This move, though, inflames Soviet worries. The KGB even suspects incorrectly that he might be a CIA agent. The Politburo sends more officers to train Afghan troops, an additional airborne battalion to Bagram airfield, and some troops to Kabul, officially for protection. By early December, Andropov leans toward intervention. Operation would allow us to decide the question of defending the gains of the April Revolution, establishing Leninist principles in the party and state leadership of Afghanistan, and securing our positions in this country. On December 12, 1979, the Politburo secretly decides on regime change. Amin will be toppled and replaced with moderate Afghan communist Babrak Karmal. To help the new Afghan government, they will also carry out a limited military deployment against Islamists and possible Iranian or Pakistani intervention. At the decisive meeting, Soviet Chief of the General Staff Nikolai Ogarkov warns against it. We will alienate the entire Muslim East and suffer political damage globally. Andropov, though, interrupts him. Focus on military matters. Leave political decisions to us, the party, and Leonid Ilyich Brezhnev. 380 Defense Minister Dmitry Ustinov gives verbal orders to prepare an invasion force. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan will be carried out by the newly created Soviet 40th Army 2 Motor Rifle Divisions and Air Assault Regiment. All in all, about 50 to 1,000 men in the initial force. Additionally, in Operation Baikal 79, 1 Airborne Division, plus 1 Airborne Regiment will directly airlift into Kabul and Bagram airfields. Then seize key buildings in and around the Afghan capital. Military transports will land 7,700 men, 890 for vehicles, and 1,062 tons of ammunition in the first wave. A further 2,000 men are already present in Kabul and Bagram from earlier deployments. The Red Army incursion is meant as a show of force for 6 months, and the new Afghan government is to do most of the fighting. Soviet Ambassador Fikret Tabayev tells Amin on December 22 that the USSR will officially send troops within days, news which Amin welcomes as he has requested them for times already. Amin is confident that Comrade Stalin showed us how to build socialism in a backward country. It's painful to begin with, but afterwards everything turns out just fine. The Soviet force will enter Afghanistan from the northwest and northeast and advance along the ring road connecting the main cities and which had been built by the US and USSR years before. On December 25th, the first Soviet troops cross the border. One pincer secures Mazar-i-Sharif, Kunduz, and continues towards Kabul. Helicopters escort the ground troops and drop advanced guards to secure the crucial Saling Pass tunnel. The other Soviet group sets out on December 27 via Herat, Shindand, and then to Kandahar. Simultaneously, the airborne forces secure key buildings across Kabul. But that's not all that happens in Kabul that day. For weeks, Soviet special forces have assembled in Kabul preparing to eliminate Amin. The invasion will be portrayed as friendly assistance. But nothing could be left to chance. Group Colonel Vasily Kolesnik is in charge of the plan. Soviet military intelligence's Muslim battalion flew into Kabul on December 10, supposedly to protect Amin. There are also two KGB teams, Zenit and Ground, and a company of air assault troops, all in all, about 560 men. Amin and Taraki had suggested the creation of the Muslim battalion to allow Soviet troops to keep a lower profile. It consists of soldiers from Soviet Central Asian republics to appear more familiar to locals and wearing Afghan uniforms to blend in with Afghan troops. The initial plan has to be redrawn after Amin moves to the Taj Beg Palace on December 16th. Although since the Soviets are providing part of his security, they get detailed plans of the arrangements at Taj Palace. Still, the Taj Beg is a tough nut to crack. It's on a hill, the surrounding area is mined, and there are Afghan army barracks and 3 Dugan T-50 for tanks nearby. More Afghan troops with tanks and anti-aircraft guns are in the vicinity as well, bringing the total to 2,500 men defending the palace. The Soviet attack force is split into 12 groups. BG-1 will neutralize the in-place tanks. BG-2 is the main assault force. With 6 BMPs, they will storm the palace via the main road and take out guard posts along the way. BG-3 will outflank the palace from the west. The other groups will pin down Afghan troops, take out Afghan anti-aircraft guns, and provide fire support, including with 4 ZSU-3 for Shilka self-propelled, radar-guided anti-aircraft weapons, and grenade launchers. Command, recovery, and medical teams are also nearby. Operation Storm 333 begins on December 27th, and Amin still believes the Soviets are on his side. The Soviet divisions are already on the way here. Paratroopers have landed in Kabul. All is going well. I am constantly on the telephone communicating with Comrade Gromyko, and we are discussing the best way to inform the world about this Soviet military assistance. Just after Amin gives this speech, the KGB tries to kill him with poison cola, but he survives. Meanwhile, Soviet teams launch sabotage operations across the city to confuse Afghan forces, including Soviet advisors removing batteries from tanks, or KGB agents crippling the telephone network. Still more Soviet units quickly take important government and infrastructure buildings, like a prison, the post office, the General Staff Building, the TV and radio center, secret police headquarters, and defense and interior ministries. Colonel Yevgeny Chernyshev records his impressions in his diary. The movement of the paratroopers' convoy through the city could be tracked by the sound of gunfire. As our units approached the targets, gunfire erupted, and tracer rounds streaked across the sky. The Afghan guards were ready to defend themselves. Yevgeny Chernyshev's diary for 1979. At the palace, Kolesnik's force runs into trouble. Although Amin believes at first the Soviets are on his side, Afghan forces are on guard after the failed cola poisoning. BG-1 engages, but the shooting causes DRO forces to raise a general alert at 7:15 p.m., so Kolesnik orders a general assault with fire support. DRA troops knock out several Soviet BMPs of BG-2, so the Red Army troops continue on foot and reach the palace at 7:40. They storm the lower floor and heavy fighting ensues. Meanwhile, BG-3 takes losses approaching the other side of the palace, but eventually reaches the palace under cover of the Shilkas. Other groups successfully pin down Afghan units outside the palace, and two groups help the stalled BG-1 to eliminate the Dugan tanks. Colonel VG Salkin remembers the attack first. KGB special units stormed the palace. Then some Spetsnaz troops followed, in an attempt to scare the defenders or perhaps out of fear. The attackers shouted loudly, mostly profanities. The fighting inside the palace immediately became fierce and uncompromising. If no one came from a room with their hands raised, the doors were broken down, grenades were thrown in. Then the attackers opened fire with automatic weapons indiscriminately. BG-2 and 3 make it upstairs in the palace, but they're down to 50 men. They kill most of Amin's bodyguards, and find and kill Amin and his two sons. The whole operations lasts 43 minutes. At least 9 Soviet troops are killed, though some claim up to 169 badly wounded, while around 200 Afghans are killed and hundreds taken prisoner. Military brass decorates nearly all Storm 333 participants, including Kolesnik, who was made a hero of the Soviet Union. Storm 333 also leaves a legacy as a daring and successful special operation. Years later, some in Russia will look at it as a bright spot in the Afghan war, and it becomes a staple of the Russian Airborne Officer Academy, including the hybrid combination with sabotage, disinformation, and subversion. The day after the raid, on December 28th, Karmal arrives in Kabul and promises the public he'll stop the torture and executions and unite the PDPA. Not included in the pre-recorded broadcast message is the ongoing execution of Amin's closest followers. Many Afghans don't believe Karmal's public reassurances. And 430,000 flee to Pakistan by January 1980. Within 72 hours the USSR has installed a new Afghan leader, even though the invasion and regime change plans were hatched mere weeks before. More than 40 years later, historians still debate why exactly the Soviets decided to invade. Operation Baikal 79 was a gamble, given Afghanistan's unstable history and the fact that the USSR was not militarily, economically, or politically prepared to nation build. The Soviets lacked local expertise and language skills, and it's still unclear exactly how much influence they really had on the PDP after the invasion. Soviet leaders knew it would damage their projected image as allies of anti-colonial movements as well. At a March meeting, Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko made the danger clear. Who will the Soviet army fight against? Against the Afghan people first and foremost, and they'll have to be fired on. Everything that we created in recent years in terms of détente, arms control, and many other things. All of that will be thrown back. Of course, it will be a good present for China. All the non-aligned countries will be against us, and yet, the Soviets had reasons to be confident. They had successfully intervened in Czechoslovakia in 1968, Ethiopia from 1974, and Angola from 1975. In Angola, local communists even functioned as vanguard party that led the revolution themselves. Moscow hoped the PDPA would play a similar role in Afghanistan. Even before the Sur Revolution, Moscow sent thousands of civilian advisors, including Communist Youth League members, to work with young Afghans. Some historians point to the potential influence of Soviet officials like Ambassador to Afghanistan Alexander Puzanov, and KGB Lieutenant General Boris Ivanov, who was long stationed in the country. Both strongly argued for intervention, and Puzanov was a close friend of Taraki. They and others close to him may have influenced Andropov, who was initially skeptical of an invasion, but available sources are incomplete. What is clear is that Amin's seizure of power tipped the balance. Moscow concluded he was not loyal to the Soviet Union and planned to shift away from the USSR. In the end, the Cold War fear of losing Afghanistan to even indirect US influence outweighed the risks. Back in December 1979, just as Gromyko fears, Moscow's roll of the dice in Afghanistan provokes a flurry of international reactions that spell trouble. The US and UK worry about Soviet control in Afghanistan, and President Jimmy Carter announces global Soviet expansionism must be stopped. The Soviet Union is going to have to answer some basic questions. Will it help promote a more stable international environment in which its own legitimate, peaceful concerns can be pursued? Or will it continue to expand its military power far beyond its genuine security needs, and use that power for colonial conquests? The Soviet Union must realize that its decision to use military force in Afghanistan will be costly to every political and economic relationship it values. Some in the Carter administration hope the conflict might turn into a Soviet Vietnam. National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski, though, worries the Mujahideen are too weak and disorganized, and lack foreign support unlike North Vietnam. He also thinks the Soviets will act more decisively than the US did in Vietnam. The US still decides to increase financial and military support for the Mujahideen, and encourages the Chinese and other Muslim countries to help them as well. But the biggest change is US policy towards Pakistan. We must both reassure Pakistan and encourage it to help the rebels. This will require a review of our policy toward Pakistan, more guarantees to it, more arms aid, and alas, a decision that our security policy toward Pakistan cannot be dictated by our non-proliferation policy. From now on, the US will be much closer to Pakistan and look the other way on nuclear weapons and questions of democracy. Pakistan-based CIA agent Howard Hart argues that the existing support for the Mujahideen should be expanded to include weapons. The Pakistanis also strengthen cooperation with Saudi Arabia. Head of Saudi Intel Turkey Al-Faisal sees Pakistan as the best option to keep the Soviets out of the Middle East, and soon provides the EC with funds matching US contributions. The UN General Assembly condemns the Soviet invasion. Many voting member states with a colonial past are uncomfortable with a great power invading a country that claimed to be non-aligned and -1 imperial. Secretary General Kurt Waldheim, ironically a former Nazi from Austria, tries to negotiate a settlement, but the USSR, the new Afghan government, and neighbors Pakistan and revolutionary Iran are not interested. There will be no quick and easy peace in Afghanistan. Soviet troops have marched into what will become a longer, costlier and bloodier war than any have imagined.